Imagine a war where speed itself became a weapon, where tanks rolled like thunder, skies burned with steel, and every heartbeat was measured in miles gained. In 1941, one man believed he could crush an empire before it could even stand. Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitz. To him, war wasn't about holding ground. It was about never stopping, never hesitating, and striking faster than fear itself could spread. His army didn't walk. It stormed across Europe like lightning unleashed. But on the other side of that storm stood a man who refused to move, Georgy Zhukov. He was no gambler, no dreamer. He was a wall made of iron and will, forged in the fires of survival. While others panicked as the German tanks roared eastward, Zhukov stood calm, his mind already building defenses where none yet existed. To him, every mile lost was only ground to retake later, every defeat a lesson to strike back harder. And when these two forces, Guderian's unstoppable speed and Zhukov's unbreakable resolve, finally collided, the earth itself trembled. The unstoppable force met the immovable wall. What followed wasn't just a battle of armies. It was a test of ideas, of endurance, of human limits. One believed in momentum, the other in patience. And when the smoke cleared, the question that haunted the world remained: who truly won, the master of motion, or the general who refused to fall? To understand this clash, we must first step back to a time when victory seemed to belong to whoever moved fast. Heinz Guderian wasn't just another German general. He was the architect of a revolution in warfare. From the ruins of World War I, he envisioned a new kind of fighting, one that would break the stagnation of trenches forever. Tanks would no longer crawl behind infantry. They would lead. Radios would replace slow messengers. Airplanes would strike ahead, opening paths for the armored spearheads below. This was the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, and Guderian was its prophet. By 1940, his ideas had already turned Europe into a blur of collapsed fronts. Poland, Denmark, Norway, and even mighty France fell before his storm of steel. He had proven that speed could shatter nations before they even understood what was happening. But that success built a dangerous illusion: the belief that speed alone was invincible. And in 1941, when Hitler turned east toward the Soviet Union, that illusion would be put to the ultimate test. Facing Guderian was a commander of very different design. Georgy Zhukov, born to a poor peasant family, rose, not through ideology or favoritism, but through relentless discipline. He had faced death on countless battlefields and learned one lesson above all: wars are not won by the fastest, but by those who can take the hardest hit and keep standing. His mind was tactical steel, cold, deliberate, unflinching. When Operation Barbarossa began, the German war machine tore through Soviet lines with terrifying speed. Cities burned, soldiers fled, and the world believed the Soviet Union would crumble in weeks. Yet in that chaos, Zhukov stood his ground, commanding, reorganizing, forcing order into panic. As Guderian's Blitz advanced like lightning, Zhukov was already building the storm that would stop it. Their confrontation wasn't merely about armies or maps. It was the collision of two philosophies that would define the fate of the Eastern Front. Before the world called him a legend, Heinz Guderian was a frustrated officer in a defeated army. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of its pride, its power, and its future. But inside that broken nation, men like Guderian were quietly planning a resurrection. He had witnessed the stagnation of World War I men rotting in trenches, dying for inches of ground. To him, that kind of warfare was madness. He believed war should be movement, not misery. Victory should be achieved not by bleeding slowly, but by striking fast. So fast that the enemy never had a chance to recover. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, Guderian studied, wrote, and dreamed about mechanized warfare. He devoured the writings of Little Hart and Fula, but he wanted to go further. He envisioned a force where tanks were not mere support for infantry. They were the army's spear. His mantra was simple: Klochizen, nicht klakekni, don't dribble, smash. When Hitler came to power, Guderian's theories found their moment. The Führer wanted shock, speed, and spectacle. Blitzkrieg became not only a tactic, but a symbol of modern war, of dominance, of fear. In Poland in 1939, Guderian's panzers sliced through resistance with terrifying precision. But it was in France in 1940 where his genius truly ignited. While the Allies fortified themselves behind the Maginot Line, Guderian's tanks rolled through the Ardennes terrain. The French deemed impassable. Within weeks, Paris was his prize. His belief in coordination, tanks, infantry, and Luftwaffe striking in harmony shattered the old doctrines of warfare. He became the poster child of German invincibility, the man who turned mobility into destruction. But beneath that triumph, arrogance began to form, not in Guderian himself, but in those above him. The Nazi high command began to believe that speed alone was unstoppable. Logistics, weather, and resistance were afterthoughts. Guderian, ever a realist, knew that even lightning needs fuel to strike. Still, his voice was drowned in Hitler's confidence. By 1941, as Germany prepared to invade the Soviet Union, Guderian was once again at the forefront, commanding Panzer Group II. His orders were clear: drive deep, destroy fast, and reach Moscow before winter. The plan was breathtaking in its ambition and suicidal in its arrogance. Yet Guderian believed in momentum. He believed that once the machine was in motion, nothing could stand in its way. But beyond the forests and rivers of the East, an entirely different kind of commander was waiting, one who did not believe in speed or spectacle, but in something much colder, much harder to break. While Guderian forged his doctrine in theory and precision, Georgy Zhukov built his through survival. Born in poverty, molded by hardship, he came from the very soil of Russia, unforgiving and patient. His rise through the Red Army was not a story of privilege, but of relentless endurance. He wasn't charismatic, he wasn't poetic, he was practical. His soldiers feared him, but they trusted him. Zhukov believed that victory was not won by speed or brilliance alone. It was earned by outlasting every storm. Before the German invasion, Zhukov's reputation was already growing. In 1939, on the remote plains of Mongolia at Kholkhin Gol, he had faced the Japanese Imperial Army and crushed them using envelopment and deception. That battle became his blueprint: lure the enemy in, absorb their strength, then counterattack when they least expect it. Stalin took notice. Despite the purges that had crippled the Red Army's leadership, Zhukov survived, not because he flattered Stalin, but because he produced results. When Operation Barbarossa erupted in June 1941, the Soviet Union was caught unprepared. German tanks advanced faster than any army in history. Entire Soviet divisions were encircled and annihilated. Cities like Minsk and Smolensk fell in weeks. Panic spread from the front lines to the Kremlin. But amidst that chaos, Zhukov's voice was clear. He demanded structure where there was panic, sacrifice where there was surrender. "We will not retreat," he declared. "We will stand, rebuild, and strike back. Zhukov's genius lay in transforming disaster into resilience. He restructured the defense lines, moved reserves strategically, and implemented scorched earth tactics, denying Guderian's panzers the fuel and supplies they desperately needed. To Zhukov, the land itself was a weapon. Every bridge burned, every rail destroyed, slowed the German machine. He wasn't trying to outrun the Blitz. He was making the Blitz exhaust itself. And as Guderian's lightning advanced further into the Soviet heartland, Zhukov was already planning the counterstorm. He studied the German patterns, predicted their overreach, and prepared Moscow for the inevitable confrontation. The two men had never met, but their minds were already locked in a duel, one fighting to end the war before winter, the other waiting for winter to become his ally. By late 1941, Guderian's panzers had achieved what seemed impossible. His armored columns had crossed rivers, encircled armies, and advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. The Blitzkrieg was at full force, and the road to Moscow lay open. German morale soared. The Soviet Union appeared broken. Yet beneath that illusion of victory, cracks began to show. Supplies ran thin. Roads turned to mud. Engines froze overnight. The very land Guderian raced through began to betray him. Meanwhile, Zhukov was fortifying Moscow with an iron camp. He ordered layered defenses, trenches, tank traps, and minefields stretching for miles. Fresh troops from Siberia, hardened by coals and trained for winter warfare, began arriving under his command. While Guderian's army burned its fuel and its strength, Zhukov built momentum quietly, patiently. To him, every day the Germans advanced was another day they weakened themselves. When Guderian reached the outskirts of Tula, south of Moscow, he faced resistance unlike anything before. Soviet defenses didn't crumble, they absorbed. Tanks rolled forward into killing zones. Infantry melted into the snow and struck back from the flanks. What was meant to be a swift final blow turned into a grinding stalemate. Guderian's radios crackled with desperate reports. Tanks bogged down, troops exhausted, fuel gone. The Blitz had met the wall. And then came winter. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Engines refused to start. Weapons froze in soldiers' hands. The German army, designed for speed, was trapped in stillness. Zhukov, seizing the moment, launched a massive counteroffensive in December 1941. Soviet troops stormed out of their trenches, driving the Germans back from the gates of Moscow. For the first time, Guderian's lightning had been extinguished. The psychological shock was immense. Hitler raged. Guderian argued for a retreat to save his men, but Hitler refused. The master of the Blitz was ordered to hold ground he knew he could not defend. The man who built his legacy on movement was now chained by politics and snow. The wall had endured and struck back. The failure before Moscow wasn't just a tactical setback, it was the moment the myth of invincibility died. Guderian's forces had proven that speed could win battles, but not wars. Blitzkrieg depended on momentum, on constant advance. Once halted, it became fragile, exposed. In January 1942, Guderian was dismissed from command after clashing with Hitler. The general who once led the fastest army in history was silenced by the man who refused to listen to reason. Zhukov, on the other hand, rose higher with every victory. His defense of Moscow turned him into a national hero and cemented his trust with Stalin. But he wasn't finished. He studied every lesson of the early defeats, how the Germans moved, how they supplied, how they broke, and turned them into the foundation for future triumphs. Under his strategic command, The Red Army evolved. It learned to move like the enemy, to hit back with its own thunder. The wall had learned to strike. In the years that followed, Zhukov directed some of the most decisive operations of the war: Stalingrad, Kursk, and the final assault on Berlin. His armies didn't rely on speed alone, but on endurance powered by sheer industrial might and will. Every counteroffensive was a mirror held up to the Blitz, proving that what had once terrified Europe could be outlasted, broken, and reversed. History often loves speed, but it remembers endurance. Guderian's brilliance reshaped warfare forever. His blitzkrieg became a blueprint for modern mechanized tactics. Yet Zhukov's defiance reshaped destiny. He proved that strategy could break momentum, that courage could outlast precision. In the end, both men won battles, but only one helped decide the war's outcome. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, it was Zhukov who stood in Berlin, accepting Germany's surrender. The wall that refused to fall had outlasted the lightning that once seemed unstoppable. And though Guderian's name still echoes through history books as a genius of motion, it was Zhukov's endurance that rewrote the fate of the world. History doesn't always answer such questions in clear victories. Guderian's genius was undeniable. He rewrote the rules of warfare, showing the world that speed, coordination, and surprise could achieve what brute strength never could. His blitzkrieg tore through Europe with mathematical precision and inspired military thinkers for generations. But brilliance, when chained to arrogance, can only go so far. Guderian's lightning struck hard, yet it burned out faster than anyone expected. The very engine of his success depended on fuel, clear skies, and endless forward motion. Once the world froze around him, so did his war. Zhukov, on the other hand, fought a different kind of battle. He didn't rely on perfection, he relied on persistence. Where others saw defeat, he saw time. Every step back was a setup for a stronger return. His genius wasn't in speed, but in rhythm, knowing when to absorb, when to strike, and when to wait for the enemy to destroy himself. When Guderian's momentum died before Moscow, it was Zhukov who turned defense into offense, endurance into victory. He swallowed didn't he? Just hold it. Learn to move, to adapt, to crush. In the end, both men represented two eternal forces of war, motion and resistance. Guderian proved that war could be won by thinking faster. Zhukov proved it could be won by refusing to break. And when these two philosophies collided, the outcome reshaped the world. The Blitz taught speed, the wall taught patience. Together, they forged the lessons every army still studies today. But in the grand arc of World War II, when empires fell and new powers rose, it was endurance that triumphed. Guderian's fastest Blitz made history. Zhukov's strongest wall-made victory. The lightning dazzled the world, but it was the wall that remained standing when the storm passed. The truth is simple. The one who didn't need to move to conquer. The one who let the storm come to him, and still stood when it was over. Zhukov's wall didn't just stop the Blitz, it buried it beneath the snow of Moscow, where the legend of invincibility finally froze forever.